Hello and welcome to another episode of This Much is True Crime with myself, Martin Frizzell, and Emeritus Professor of Criminology, David Wilson. Hello, David.
Martin, lovely to see you again. And you're wearing a tartan tie. Why is that?
I've been at a St Andrew's Day lunch with all the great and the good from Scotland in London Scottish Rugby, and a business grouping called London Business or Scots in London Business. And it was lovely, and it honoured, every year they honour some great Scots. Sadly, not my time this year, nor yours, I'm afraid. Maybe that's still to come. But Sir Alex Ferguson was honoured today, and for all his age, he's still very sharp. Got a fantastic memory, and also he was talking about the hard uh, life upbringing which he loved as a kid in Govan, working in the shipyards as a young man, and he'd be woken up 6 a.m. His dad would come in, shake his feet and say, "Right, up you get," and that's the kind of as a philosophy he instilled in all his football teams as well, just hard work. And it's a real kind of Scottish kind of trait, I think, isn't it, as well, that we're known for that.
I agree, but I suppose I'm just as intrigued by knowing which tartan does a Frizzell wear? Which clan do you belong to?
We're from the clan Fraser, and there are quite a few Fraser clan members there today, properly kitted out with kilts and trousers. I wore a tie, but this is actually, I didn't know it, but this is a grey. This is the grey clan Fraser tartan, $9.99 off Amazon. I think it's actually quite cool and quite nice. So that was my homage to the mother country. But a very nice afternoon we had. But of course, I came back here because I've been looking into this story that we're talking about this time round, which has just. It was a trial that lasted no more than 2 days, basically, because Paul Doyle, who we're talking about, 54 years old, from Liverpool, and everyone will probably remember from last May, Liverpool wins the Premier League, and 1 million Liverpool fans descend on the Mersey, on Liverpool, to celebrate the open-top bus parade that goes through. And then, of course, there's that dreadful, dreadful scene where a car goes through, absolutely crowded pack of Liverpool fans confined into a street, and 130 or so more injured, some very badly, from as young as a baby up to someone in their 70s. And Paul Doyle, age 54, is accused, 31 charges, from anything from dangerous driving to GBH. And he went to trial and he was pleading not guilty. And then all of a sudden, clearly, lawyers or someone or the judge or whatever it may have been said, "Look, we've got dash cam footage. We've got it from your car. It's fait accompli, job done." And he changed his plea to guilty. And we're waiting for sentencing now, which will come in the middle of December. But David, is this a story of a man who just snapped?
Great summary as ever, Martin, and thank you for doing that, because I always forget some of the details. And just in terms of what he's pleaded guilty to, he's pleaded guilty to grievous bodily harm with intent. And there's often a confusion in the law, or the public's understanding of the law, between intent and premeditation. And so this is not premeditated. In other words, he didn't wake up on the morning that this incident took place and decide he was going to behave in this way, but it was just in the actual moment when he's encountering the crowd that he very deliberately uses his car, Galaxy, to go through the crowd. Now, does he just snap? One of the things that confused me very early on, and I kept saying, "Oh, we're going to find out about a history of alcohol abuse, a history of drugs or mental health issues," but actually, none of those things emerged at all. We discover that Doyle is a happily married family man. We discover from interviews that have been conducted with his neighbors that he's a great neighbor. He's a scout leader. He's involved in his local church. He is just an ordinary guy. And so, to answer your question directly, um, I started, therefore, to look at some kind of explanation for his behavior, either in terms of what's been publicly revealed by the Crown Prosecution Service. We might find out more when he is defended, when it comes to sentencing, and when his defense is allowed to say something on behalf of him. We might find out some more. But at the moment, what I've got in my head are two pieces of information. The first is he's an ex-Royal Marine and very honorably discharged from the Marines. And after he was discharged, he goes into IT, and various colleagues of his in Liverpool who have worked with him in the IT industry have revealed that he was a great guy. He was a mentor to one particular man who was interviewed by the BBC. But there was this wonderful vignette which I think began to give me an insight into Doyle and his personality, which may be part of the explanation for what took place. This former colleague said that they had climbed Kilimanjaro in Tanzania to raise money for a charity. And Doyle was seemingly wonderful all through the trip. And then when they were descending the mountain, two other people ran ahead of Doyle. And because he was so intensely competitive, was the phrase that was used, he turns to the colleague and says, "I'm not having that," and ran after the two people who had run ahead of them and quite clearly outsprinted them. So we've got this Royal Marine, somebody used to wearing a uniform, someone used to being in control, this intensely competitive man who is capable of winning when he feels he needs to assert his authority. And then suddenly we've got this incident. And I'm going to throw a phrase at you now, Martin, which I suppose is what you quite like me doing, I think that what we are seeing, in the absence of any information about what he's been using on social media, he may have been using some websites that I don't know about, and in the absence of any knowledge that is in the public domain about his mental health, I think what we see here is what's known as a catathymic crisis.
Now, first of all, I think the site Fortnite, I think, has been mentioned. He had search, or he had been certainly using that. It would appear through the court disclosures, but also the prosecution were saying, David, that they don't think it was just a snap, because his dash cam footage on the morning of the parade, he left home and he was going to, not quite sure whether he was picking someone up or dropping someone off, but he was heading into center of town where he got caught up in all the traffic. But the dash cam footage showed before he got there that he was jumping red lights, that he was undertaking people, he was driving erratically. So they're suggesting it wasn't just this kind of sort of momentary kind of road rage that made him do this because he was stuck in amongst a whole bunch of fans and was frightened. They're saying there was something going on before that.
Well, I've been interested in what the Crown Prosecution have said about his driving prior to the instance, but the phrase that they used that's going to lead to the criminal charges, which he's pleaded guilty to, is this calculated use of violence in the moment when he is surrounded by the Liverpool fans celebrating their victory, their win. And I think this takes me back to the cathathymic crisis. And if I can just explain that a little bit, this is a concept that was introduced by a Swiss psychiatrist in 1912, picked up a great deal by American psychiatrists, Frederick Wertham being the most obvious example of American psychiatrists who use this. And Wertham, in particular, develops the concept to describe it as acute or as chronic. And I think what we've got here is an acute catathymic crisis. And what that does is bring to the surface subconscious trauma, subconscious fear, subconscious need to be in control of a circumstance which has lain dormant. And it's only because of being in that moment, there is this overriding psychological need to be in charge, to take control, to use violence, to reestablish a sense of being in control, and forgive the Freudianism, to protect the ego. And really, what one sees, if you marry that to the intense competitiveness that we know about, the fact that he used to wear a uniform, he used to be a Royal Marine, he used to carry a gun, he was probably at some stage in charge of crowds and was able to order those crowds to do as he wanted them, to behave as he wanted them to behave. And I think in that moment, when he is surrounded by a crowd again, he wants to compete against the crowd, not the two tourists who were running down Mount Kilimanjaro. He wants to compete against the crowd and believes that in that moment, these subconscious needs, fears, trauma to be in control work their way to the surface. And the tragedy is 134 people get injured. But it's not about him seeing the red mist. It's not about him snapping. It's about the sense of there being a crisis that is emerging from his subconscious into his conscious life, his behavior, which he has to act upon to protect himself, to protect his feeling, his to protect his identity and a feeling of who he is.
Are you saying then that this was latent? This was always there, and it just needed. I mean, when you say it wasn't just a snap, I mean, but could that snap be a trigger of some kind? Which well, obviously it's a trigger of some kind that sparks it. But could that be anxiety or even a sense of claustrophobia, or if you've got people banging on your windows? All of a sudden you would panic, and would it panic that would kind of trigger that?
Yes, that's exactly what the phenomenon tries to explain. The phenomenon tries to explain why do we see this explosive, extraordinary violence from people that are not normally violent. And then once and that explanation fits with him because I think it is latent, it is subconscious, but in that moment, in those moments, because it is an acute rather than chronic crisis, all those latent subconscious fears, anxieties, traumas will bubble to the surface and he will react because he feels he is protecting his sense of who he is. And the other thing that fitted with Doyle when I started to look at him is that nobody can be left in any doubt he's hugely remorseful. He is one would say a broken man. And after a catathymic crisis has subsided, the person is suddenly aware of what they've done and is remorseful, is overcome by what they have done, and realizes that they have got this absolutely catastrophically wrong.
Is what he did, and I don't want to belittle it at all, but is it an extreme form of road rage, which we're all kind of capable of? I mean, we just didn't have a military background, most of us, but we're all capable of losing it completely. I mean, as we know, down through the years, there's been some dreadful cases, deaths from that as well, from people just completely losing it in that moment, where I keep thinking of the film Falling Down with Michael Douglas, the Joel Schumacher film. And now that goes very violent and very extreme. But that is a case of a man who clearly has a mental problem, and just stuck in gridlock, can't take it anymore, and everywhere he turns that day, someone's out to get him, down to the point of, we've all had it, whether you go to a McDonald's or something else to have the breakfast, please, sorry, but we stopped serving breakfast. Well, why? Well, it's 11:33, we stopped at 11:30, just all those things. We've all got from my mind, we've all got the capacity to do something really crazy if, you are stressed out and you just flip.
Those are really interesting points. And of course, that allusion to the Joel Schumacher, Michael Douglas film Falling Down is a very interesting one. And of course, it was the beginnings. Memory serves me correctly, it was the beginning of 1990s when that film was released. And it's the beginning
1993, yeah.
the phrase that's now emerged into popular culture about white man's rage. And of course, the character that Michael Douglas plays had been involved in the defense industry, so had a military background. But the difference between that character and what we see with Doyle, as far as we know, is that there's no history of mental health problems. It doesn't mean to say that there isn't something there that hasn't reached the public domain. It doesn't mean to say that there isn't some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder we're dealing with. But your specific question, is it just an extreme form of road rage? I don't think it's the road and the car that's significant so much as the fact that he is surrounded by people. And that's not what one sees in that film. Falling down. What one sees, and there's masses of footage about this, what one sees is a man that is surrounded by a crowd that he cannot control, but somehow believes that he should be able to control because no doubt in his past, while serving as a Marine, he has had to do a lot of crowd control. And I think it's that is bringing to the surface something that's latent, something that has clearly caused him problems in the past, and something that he feels he needs to act upon in that moment, because in that moment, he feels his ego, the person who he is, his identity, is going to be overwhelmed by not being able to take control of that process. Because everything that one has heard about Paul Doyle tells us that this was a very caring man. This is somebody who would not um, knock down children, knock down adults. This is somebody who'd go out of his way to help other people. And therefore, I think the best I can come in trying to explain from the information I have available to us is that that is what was happening to him. And after the crisis subsides, because it's acute and an acute crisis will go away, he is remorseful and overcome by what he did. And Martin, please forgive me. I'm not just trying to come up with a fancy phrase, because understanding why he behaved like this seems to me to be crucial in terms of his sentencing, in terms of what might happen to him once he receives a sentence and he's been told to expect a lengthy sentence. It's crucial in trying to understand why he behaved like this, because that will predict how he should be treated. Because if he comes back into the community, when he comes back into the community, he's not going to get a whole life tariff. When he comes back into the community, we want to make sure he won't behave like this again.
And also, you've put it very, in my mind, it's a very sensible explanation where you're coming from. There's a few things. We're men, and if we have mental health issues, we tend not to talk about it. So for all we know, he could have had things there. He was almost Mondeo man. He was the upstanding middle class pillar of the community type character who would go out onto his grass and bare feet and ground himself. He wasn't, you would think, the kind of character who would deliberately plow into a crowd of football fans. All those things taken into account, why did his lawyers then not use just what you've just said? Why did they not use what you're explaining as his defense? Plead guilty, but here are the mitigating reasons for it, rather than going through the whole process and assembling a jury and 2 days in stopping it and saying, actually, yes, it was me. Why did the defense not go down the route of compassion?
Well, I genuinely don't know the answer to that question. I can guess. I can guess that there was a sense in which the defense would be able to say that he feared. he was scared that I imagine that there was going to be some kind of um, explanation for his behavior. But increasingly, it must have been obvious that the explanations from his behavior weren't particularly strong and couldn't sustain a not guilty plea. And fair credit to Paul Doyle, I think, because he himself must have realized that, I did do this. And he's probably, as much as everybody else seems to be, trying to work out what it was that he had done. I am hoping, and again, I don't know, that his defense had commissioned some kind of psychiatric or psychological reports on him. And again, um, might become into the more known within the public domain. Can I also just take you back because you were, I love when we talk because you challenge me to think about these things in different ways. And if we go back to Falling Down, which is the beginning of White Man Rage, the other thing that's different about the character that Michael Douglas plays, something Foster, I can't remember his first name as a character.
It's William Foster.
William Foster, thank you. Um, uh, William Foster, the character, is divorced, is trying to get across town because he's wanting to go to his daughter's birthday party.
That's right.
There's a restraining order against him. He's just been made redundant. So there are all these explanations buried in William Foster's background that simply don't apply to Paul Doyle. Paul Doyle is happily married. Paul Doyle is a pillar of the local community, is employed, and therefore there's no white man rage involved here, and nor was there any terrorism. Remember, terrorists have used plowing cars, lorries into dense populations as a terror tactic. There's no terrorism going on here. So when you rule everything else out, and I started to think about it, the best I could come up with was a catathymic crisis. And I'm very happy. I would be very happy to talk to Paul Doyle, Paul Doyle's family. I'd be very happy to meet with whoever's representing him and try and talk through that. Because quite clearly, this is somebody facing a very long sentence. And I worry about somebody who's gone through this, having dealt with a couple of offenders who've gone through this. I worry about what will happen to him in jail.
And again, and I'm not meaning to belittle the severity of what happened on that day, but clearly this is a man who's a mental health issue. What is to be gained from banging him up for a long time in jail?
Well, I think
Apart
justice
from punishment, obviously.
Yes, and I think justice has to be seen to be done, and justice being seen to be done in this context with so many people injured, including very young people. I think a lengthy prison sentence is actually warranted. What I want, though, with that lengthy prison sentence, is for Paul Doyle to be given support and help to be able to come to terms himself. This is clearly a very distressed and broken man, to be given help so that he can come to to some sense of himself, so that he feels he can move on into the future. I can't help but be really. I was incredibly moved when I saw Doyle, and it was quite, and then read the reports about what he was like in court, and it is quite clear this is a very, very, very broken man.
What does it tell us, or what lessons can we learn from that? Because modern life, just existing, seems to have stresses almost every minute of the day. You feel, certainly in big cities, you feel everyone's just out to get you. That's kind of quite a common feeling. There's always someone or something trying to trip you up. that just adds to the stress, that adds to your mental health. I just wonder, is it you know, talk about it. Just explain how you're feeling to people. Share your feelings as opposed to bottling things up. Maybe.
Oh, totally. But I come from a background which is always about talking. I come from a background where, uh, my family, how I was brought up and how I live with my family now is always to be open and talking about these issues. And let's be honest, you and I, we talk to each other about our mental health. We talk to each other about how we're feeling. We talk to each other if we're tired or if we're down. And, that is a good thing. Every Saturday, every single Saturday, I will have breakfast with two of my close friends who live in Buckingham. One's a forensic psychologist and the other's an anthropologist. And over bacon and eggs, we talk through what's been happening in our lives. And I've started to acknowledge that very publicly, that we have breakfast and we have breakfast together and we talk about what our lives are like. And I think I'm very lucky in that way that I have friends I'm able to share that with, including yourself. Um, and I just hope that other people have that. Now, it seemed to me that Doyle did have that support network, but I have yet to hear him or somebody that knew him talk about him being vulnerable. I've yet to hear somebody say, he's an ex-Royal Marine who was great, but he had issues after he left the service or whatever it was. All I've heard about Paul Doyle is he's a do anything to help you, pillar of the local community, Boy Scout leader, um, uh, but I haven't heard a mentor, but but intensely competitive. And I haven't heard anybody say, and he had demons. He was worried about what happened to him in wherever it might have been, Afghanistan, Northern Ireland, I don't know. And I do wonder if Paul Doyle had the same access as you and I have to each other, to a best friend, and to friends that you can go and have a Saturday breakfast with.
Just looking at his career history or his career path, um, there were lots of ups and downs, but it always looked like he was, if he had taken a blow, he'd try and set up a business or he'd get into IT or he'd go into care or something. It felt like he always knew he had to be working. Is that because he felt, he had to provide, he had to be the hunter gatherer? Was there stress on him in that way? I suppose, hopefully, these things will come out at the sentence hearing that will be the mitigation.
And if you take that full circle to where we started our conversation this evening, you talked about Alex Ferguson in Govan and what a hard childhood it was and being woken up by his father to go and work on the shipyards, and how men had a one-dimensional model about what masculinity was and the role that a man played within a family and within a broader community. And thank heavens we now recognize that there are multiple ways of being a man, multiple ways of performing masculinity.
I do have to. I was smiling when you're talking about meeting your friends for breakfast at the weekend and going through and talking, unburdening yourself. When I ever meet people, I just talk about how mad I am. And I don't feel like it's cathartic at all. It literally is. I've got another parking ticket, or I went into a yellow box, or the noise outside, or the scaffolders, whatever it is. I, maybe I have to go into a special session somewhere where I can just, basically have a mindful enema where it just all comes out, and I don't have to worry too much about the stress. I feel all right on the stress, but when I do talk with friends, it's just about how maddening the modern world is.
And I have to remind you repeatedly, I always think when you do that, and when you do talk about getting another ticket, how incredibly nice you are, how much I enjoy your company, and how successful you have been and will continue to be. And a lot of Scots, and you're one of them, tend to think of their glass being half empty. I always think my glass, if you can just turn your psychology into thinking your glass is half full and treating the world like that, then that often gives yourself a break. That often gives yourself a break that you don't need to control absolutely everything that it means to exist in the society. But just keep giving yourself a wee pat on the back.
Alongside as well, we spoke about Scotland going to the World Cup. We had Alex McLeish, Willie Miller, and Alex Ferguson on the stage. It was just a great in a big posh London hotel. I think a lot of us were looking around thinking, we've done all right to get here, haven't we?
Pleased. I'm really pleased that you had a good time and you're smiling. And that's the first time you've smiled tonight on the pod.
No, because I've got my Tunnock snowball here.
Was
You know,
Tunnock
it's a
there?
Scottish
Was
event
Mr.
when there's a
Tunnock
Tunnock
there?
snowball and a Tunnock's caramel log. So I'm off to have a cup of tea now and enjoy
But was
these.
Mr. Tunnock at the thing that you were at?
Well, they were just in bowls, basically. Bowls, I mean, quite frankly, it could have been a bowl of anything. It was free, so I was taking it, but they happened to be Scottish and Tunnocks. And thank you for that. So we'll look again at just how severe or otherwise this sentencing is going to be. But it looks like he has to go to jail clearly for this. It's just a question of how long. And as you said, what help he gets while he's there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
For the
And
time being,
remember,
Professor, thank you very much indeed. Until the next one.
Martin Frizzell, give yourself sometimes a pat in the back. Your glass is always half full.
I have just one last thing, but and I got another fined twice for going through a low traffic neighborhood scheme that I wasn't aware was there. And I thought, do you know what? Rather than just pay the 80 quid within two weeks, shall I just take it? Shall I just take it to the nth degree? Shall I just go to court? I want my day in court. And then I just thought, oh God, which they're hoping you will do. I just thought, oh God, what the hell? I can one less thing to worry about in life. But one day, I will be that soldier. I won't be as bad as falling down, but I will have snapped. I'll be in court, and I want my day in court is what I want.
And I'll defend you, Martin, and I'll say you had a cathathymic crisis.
Bring our Scottish charm to it. David, thank you very much. See you soon.
You take care. Bye.